In 1995, the Tibetans of Taschlin in Pokhara, western Nepal, celebrated the 30th anniversary of the founding of their refugee community in exile. Over 30 years, they have established themselves in a foreign country and survived. Some have flourished. Is this a settlement, or is it just a place of waiting? In 1965, it was all quite different when a group of refugees, mainly nomads, ended up in a field just beside the Pokhara airport.
They had to survive on quota, food quota. Every month or every week they used to get limited amount of food. And they had to work. And so, even in Taschlin you might have heard, they were working in the road construction. You see, breaking the stones. So every one of them, whether they were in Kathmandu or whether they were in Pokhara or wherever they were, all of them had very difficult days in the beginning of the, when they started coming to Nepal.
In 1951, the Chinese Red Army had invaded Tibet, asserting by force of arms that Tibet was part of China. By 1959, after 8 years of trying but failing to negotiate a settlement, the Tibetan people in Lhasa took up arms against the Chinese. They were swiftly and brutally suppressed. His Holiness the Dalai Lama fled into exile to India. Over the ensuing years, many tens of thousands of Tibetans followed him over the inhospitable passes of the Himalayas into India and Nepal.
I came from my parents, my father, my mother, and they carried me on their backpack. And it's very hard for us. We spent many times, very difficult time past, we call La, which is pass. A lot of snow there, and they have no food, and we have no clothes. And I sleep with my mother, with the old dress, and they are very kind for me to bring in this Nepal.
Over the 2 years 1965 to 1967, a new refugee settlement was planned and established, a collaboration between the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, the Nepal Red Cross, and the Tibetans themselves. 3 British volunteers worked with the Tibetans. In 1995, 30 years later, they revisited Taschlin, the village settlement which was created. The new village, its rectangular layout designed by the Tibetans, was built 1 mile south of the original refugee camp. The Tibetans did the work under the guidance of skilled Nepali craftsmen. At last the houses were ready with their tin roofs, and we were able to look out over the old site, now completely cleared of the bamboo huts and tents. A procession formed and the people walked together to their new homes, named by the Dalai Lama Taschlin, happy place. Perhaps the most striking thing for us was that we had walked into a field full of tents, and we were leaving behind a village of stone houses.
It was one of our hopes when we were here, was that the people would develop their houses from the very basic structure they had to start with. Just a stone walls, tin roof, mud floor, very basic. And now we see some houses, I mean, most of them are extended in some way or another, some to bring 2, 3 more rooms, all plastered inside, with their shrines in one room, beautiful carpets. There are some very, very nice homes there. The level of some of the homes that people have got here now is really amazing. Given that it has not been easy economically over the last 30 years, but also they are saying, my home is important to me. They're putting their money into their living environment, rather than, as some people could do, spending it out. It's going into bricks and mortar, it's going into their home, their children and all these things. The fact that this community is now full, every house is occupied, it says something about the fact that the people feel it is a success. Perhaps it does surprise me that the community structure here now is stronger than we had ever believed it could be. And that to me is success. Because you have a lot of needy people here who need support, who need help. And if the community didn't have a sense of community and didn't have a way of operating as a community, then people would suffer terribly here. And I don't think you see people suffering terribly here because they're working they have a level of operation, of community. They clearly are caring for each other, and that is fantastic.
Building houses was only one part of the job. In order to survive in a foreign land, the Tibetan refugees had to be able to earn a living. For many, this has come to be some aspect of the tourism industry. Dondrup Tsering was one of the hotel apprentices who went to Kathmandu for training in 1966.
In my opinion, I mean, if Nepal didn't have the tourism, then we had a very, very hard life. But fortunately, you know, Nepal became a tourism. At the same time, we more or less we could take some advantage. So the development for the lakeside for tourism is very important for the Tibetan too.
In terms of percentages,
Mm-hmm.
how much does the Tibetan community rely on?
Oh, I think it's 95, I would say. We are totally dependent on 95.
I wouldn't say they're controlled, but they have a great influence in the tourist industry in Nepal in general and in Pokhara in particular. all these souvenir shops that you can see around the lake as well as here in the camp have initially started by the Tibetans. And I think in a way 2 of the first restaurants in Pokhara were also started by the Tibetans, namely Himalaya and Annapurna in the early 60s. So from that angle, I think Tibetans have been a factor in initiating tourist industry in this region. Because there's no other means for the Tibetans but to do trade. I think this is why they come up with the tourist being more successful with the tourist industry. Maybe had they had more options, maybe there was a different story. And the other side of the coin is, of course, if they cannot expand from here, even though the Tibetans have been living here for 30 years, they are still not naturalized by the host government. They are still refugees. And this means they cannot own any property.
Because we didn't have anything. We had the handicrafts, yeah, which did sometimes quite well, but even all cannot work. So we didn't have anything. We don't have farming. And then tourists were very keen of Tibetan, as was very isolated country, and some all people, our own things were sold. Then gradually that business started. So at the moment, this is the only thing we could live on.
A handicraft centre was also established.
Well, we started with 5 people sitting on a bamboo mat, 5 old women sitting on a bamboo mat outside in the middle of the camp. And they spun some wool and they wove some coats, and we found that they did sell. We found that we could make shoulder bags and boots. And with slight adaptations, these lines could be developed to suit a European tourist's taste. And so we set up a shop up at the airport. The shop was actually in a hotel which the Business Projects Committee had established. And gradually the business developed until now, down at the new village, there is a large workshop which employs about 50 people, and things have actually been exported to Europe.
Mr. Onta was the refugee officer of the Nepal Red Cross in 1965. Now he is its national director.
In whole Nepal, Tibetan refugees they were accepted very well, and at the same time, the contribution made by Tibetans in Nepal is that it is manufacture of or production of carpets. Because before their arrival to Nepal, we didn't have that good quality carpets in Nepal. We used to have locally made carpets, but we never had good and quality carpets which could be exported. So the major contribution, very positive contribution of Tibetans in Nepal is the production of carpets, which really took the international market. Another thing is Tibetan food, Tibetan clothing, dresses. So all these are, you will find tourist attraction in Nepal. So you will find whether it is a Pokhara even in Kathmandu, all the tourists visiting Nepal, they will have a program, visit to Tibetan settlement. That's another interesting aspect. No tourist will go back without visiting Tibetan settlement.
Spinning is a job reserved for some of the elderly inhabitants of the village, so that they can earn their living. But 60% of the weavers are now Nepalis, the Tibetans preferring to trade in tourist souvenirs or work in the hotels and restaurants.
Maybe about 50% people, they don't like to do this business because they know that what's going to happen in the future. You know, it's nothing stable. If there is no tourists, then what's going to happen? Because people here, they living by daily life, like day-to-day life. So that's why for a whole year, living for a whole year, they're doing business for this only tourist season, during tourist season.
The very categorical question is that what will happen if this carpet industry could not grow? We had the experience for last 2 years, more than 2 years, we are having this experience, you see. Previously, we used to have very good carpet industry and good export to Germany and many European countries and America also. So we were earning quite a good foreign exchange, and Tibetans were very, very happy because they were producing carpets and selling very well. But for last 2 years, because of several factors, especially the involvement of child labor, there was a hue and cry in the European market. So they were not interested to import Nepalese productions. So that really made whole slash down the whole carpet industry.
For Sonam Sangbo, one of the star pupils of the class of 67, the answer to the uncertainty of tourism is education.
This is what I say, that education is very important. Because the present situation, anybody can, even who are not educated at all, even who are not able to read and write, they still can go at the lakeside and sell souvenirs, and they can earn money because tourist is there. But the tourist business is not be stable. If you don't have a better opportunities or better destinations to sell tourists, the one day tourists will finish. Everybody comes to Nepal once or twice, thrice, and they won't come more than that because there are so many other beautiful places in the world. And also there's not better management preserving for environments and better management for the people, for the tracks. So the tourists will definitely become a more less and less. So in this case, if you don't have education and if you don't have these tourists, the future economics is dark. So that's why I always say that the education is very important. If you have an education, you don't have to stick in Nepal. You can try to find some other opportunities in different countries.
The education of the children developed fairly quickly. We started off under a tree with just circles of stones for classrooms. Although this was a very wonderful classroom, perhaps the most beautiful classroom in the world, looking out over the Himalaya range, as the monsoon came, obviously we couldn't sit in this field any longer. So we were forced, in fact, to build our first permanent school made of bamboo.
In the part in 1964, my school was in a tree, and we have no even roof. If we get rain, we just take kapi, and then we just go away. And then we have small huts, you know, in our home is very small. We go there and just to stay there, yes? And it's very hard time. And then after that, 1964, 5, 6, 7, and then I think it's a little better. We have bamboo huts like that, and then we have more, a little more books, and which is the John Roger, they bring some English comic. I remember that. And he bring very long way from England. He brings small, you know, comic, and we play with them, and we make the construction, you know, things. I remember that, especially we play that one. We make some small construction and like that. And sometimes I saying I want to become engineer, and I want to make build like that. And this is like story. I never forgot that. And then after that, 1966 or 7, so we came in this place, Choripatan. So we have nice group and mat and stone, in the constructed, and then the roof, tin roof.
The Tibetans have given increasing importance to education. In the 1980s, the Hermann Gmeiner SOS school was built in Taschlin, replacing the 1966 stone school.
Now if I compare, which is my first school, and here, we have very big difference. Now we got very good opportunity here. We have beautiful school here. I think one of the best school for the Tibetan refugee camp.
This is an indication that the next 30 years will not be the same as the first 30 years. For example, first 30 years, Thupten Tashi, who is a main player here, Lobsang Gyaltsen, myself, we have not had formal education. We only had class 8, class 10 education. We were lucky in the sense that we managed to jump rather fast in our special field and then continue from there. So this half-educated group will become, in the next 30 years, fully educated group. And from there, as I said, the community will join the international community.
So where you will find most manual work is involved, you will find that there is less interest in this aspect of the education. I mean vocational type of education, you see. More skilled people are needed while the country is developing, while the society is developing, you see, rather than the white-collar job. But the thing is that there should be some psychological change. Our society also wants that the children should go for more, they go for white-collar job rather than for vocational type of manual job, you see. You will find almost same thing in Tibetan society also.
"30 years on, and Taschlin has matured, has a settled appearance. The Tibetans may live in Nepal, but they have strongly retained their culture and their language despite the difficulties."
When you talk about traditional Tibetan culture preserving, I can see the positive side and negative both. By grace of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he could build Tibetan refugee camps everywhere. So we are living in a community, easier to preserve the Tibetan culture. And also our youngsters, they are able to preserve Tibetan culture and all these things. But they have a lot of influence, so that's why they cannot be exactly like elder people want to. I mean, it's very difficult to preserve our culture, but still, I mean, there are a lot of influence, and I mean, it's important what are valuable to preserve. And for instance, like Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan traditional culture, Tibetan culture or Tibetan history, or the source of Tibetan Buddhism. So this Buddhism is not only religious, This teach us to lead our life.
A monastery has been built at Taschlin with monks in residence. The refugees are settled here, but they have become restless.
It is said that about 5,000 to 7,000 Tibetans were settled, you see. But it was very rather difficult to keep the record of all these people because they were very much moving, you see. For example, in Taschlin, we had a problem because people were moving and they wanted to go to the areas, or for example, come from Kathmandu for more prosperous job opportunity, you see, rather than living in Pokhara. Similarly, those people in Rasua, in the northern belt, they wanted to come down to Kathmandu because they get more opportunity here for working and earning the livelihood. So this was the problem right in the beginning. In Taschlin also we had the problem when we constructed the buildings and we settled them. There was a period when the people, they just moved out of the settlement, you see. And the people were less in number than in the beginning when we settled them. But now again, last few years, now they came back. And now you will find Taschlin fully occupied, you see.
This statue of Lord Buddha is presented to the people of Taschlin Tibetan settlement by John Pierce, Roger Campbell, David and Jobe Bolger to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the settlement with which they had the privilege of being involved.
For many of the Tibetans, Taschlin still is not a permanent home. Even the monastery is impermanent, a Tibetan institution which happens for now to be in Nepal.
Now, the question is that to expect or to hope that there will be change in Tibet and Tibetans should be interested to go back and settle there and have a new life there, that is very difficult to say. But if you talk to the people living in Nepal, and maybe old generation, they are still interested to go back to Tibet if there is change.
Hopefully, Tibetans will not have to be refugees for the next 30 years. There will be some sort of resolution or resolving the issue of Tibet, and therefore something will happen and then a change will take place. That's the hope.